Hi, and welcome to the SU May live stream podcast, where we talk all things to build up your confidence so that you too can go after your dreams, give yourself the permission to do so, and follow through on your ideas. Today, we're going to interview a friend of mine who is all about comedy these days, and somebody who has recently released a book. And by recently, I mean I feel like last week, a few days ago, not even that, not even a week actually. And I'm actually in this book, which is the first book I've ever been in. It is very exciting. So without further ado, I want to bring on Mr. Rich Hopkins. Thank you for coming to the show and welcome.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
I appreciate you coming on and talking about comedy with me. It's
You
such
bet.
a good
Well,
topic.
you were talking about confidence, and it's that lack of confidence that usually gets in the way of anybody trying to use humor when they speak.
Yeah, totally. I think humor is one of those things that some people, yes, have some natural ability to it, but a lot of people struggle trying to identify how to do it better. And man, I feel like that's something that you can help them out with, especially with this book, is I guess here's my first question. How did you decide I'm going to focus more on humor? What's the backstory of like, okay, I feel funny, or maybe I don't feel like I'm a funny person. How did you get into like trying to figure this humor topic out?
Well, I've kind of been at an advantage over a lot of people because people have always told me I'm funny ever since I was a little kid. I'd make bad jokes. I would do skits. I'm extroverted in front of people, although I'm introverted by nature. But I don't think I was necessarily really funny. I think they were just building up my confidence, which the more confident I became, the more I was able to experiment with being funny. And when you experiment with being funny, that means you can not be funny and learn what isn't funny so that you can then be funny. It's all trial and error. When you're looking at learning how to use humor, trial and error not only with what humor you use, but in front of what audience you use. There's
Right.
humor that I could use in front of my friends that, oh, wow, I couldn't use that with my mom. Hmm.
True. True. That's something interesting you bring up. I think people sometimes forget it's audience based. And I think one of the big things that is the mistake is not understanding who's in front of you when you're trying to do humor and giving yourself that permission to laugh and not take things so seriously. How do you identify your audience? How do you know, okay, this is going to work for somebody versus maybe this is not the time and place?
Well, it kind of depends on your situation. I mean, you should know your audience if you're in the workplace, if you're in school, if you're in church, if you're with your family. But if you're talking about being a professional speaker, then you really have to do your research and figure out not just the basic demographics of your audience, their age,
Right.
their sex, their overall culture, but find out what's happening in that company.
Mm,
Find out what's happened recently in people's lives. You don't want to make some joke that's based on a news event that adversely affected that company and you didn't even know about it because you didn't do your research. So you got to make sure you know not just where you're talking to as a group, but sometimes some of the very specific people who are a part of that group.
so what I hear you saying is doing your homework in advance plays out
Something I
big
never
time.
did as a child.
Yeah, I mean, homework is but it's important to know and educate yourself on who you're speaking with and what you're speaking about. And that inherently, if you're educated, that gives you that permission
Right.
to go with it. So that's
Without that
super cool.
research, that's where people run into danger and where they create that fear because the higher the stakes, the worse outcome if humor falls flat. Problem is, if you have no humor, then the whole speech could fall flat.
Right.
Humor is that
Yeah.
connection point with your audience. Jeffrey Gitomer is a famous sales trainer, famous author. You can look him up, Gitomer. One of his most famous quotes is that the height of learning comes immediately after laughter.
Mm,
So if you can get the
I
audience
like
to
that.
laugh, they are ready to hear the point you're trying to make, and they will connect that point with the laugh in their head, with the story that they're laughing at when you're telling it. And that's why I use the term humor more than comedy, because
Mm,
comedy tends to be,
yeah.
here's a joke, there's a joke, here's a pun. Whereas humor is finding humorous aspects of a situation, maybe a one off line. Like when I mentioned that I didn't do homework as a kid, it wasn't a preconceived joke, it was a within the stream of consciousness comment
Right.
to throw in some levity.
That makes sense. And I think I really love that quote, first of all. The height of learning comes immediately after laughter. I think that's something that we can keep in mind is being aware, just like anything else. Like when you all of a sudden start to be aware of something, then you learn more from it. So the first step in a lot of things is being aware and looking for those opportunities, right? So when you do laugh, why did you laugh? Taking that time to reflect afterwards, like, what was it that made that funny? Why did I feel the need to laugh? Was it tension? Was it, something else? And then how can I replicate that? How can I do
Right.
it again? But if you are just unaware, I know for me a lot, I mean, I would just tell stories all my life and just be entertaining in the moment because I'm very expressive. If you're just listening to this, come take a watch sometime over on YouTube or Spotify because I'm extra. I'm very expressive and I didn't realize that A wasn't normal, but B was the humorous part of it, was the full on fact. So I'm a very um, physical humorist, I think is the right word. Whereas you can say something very dry and deadpan, and that can also be humorous in its own delivery. How do you identify like what kind of humor suits you?
Well, you have to pay attention to when people are laughing at what you say,
Yeah.
as
Right.
opposed to laughing at you.
Right.
You don't want them laughing at you. You want them laughing next to you, laughing. Oh, you just changed where I
Yes.
was.
Sorry.
So now you're laughing next to me, but in a smaller way.
Yes.
All right.
I like the toys. You gotta change up the views.
So when you find out what they're laughing at, you can discover whether it's dry humor. You can discover whether or not you're more of what you said, a physical humorist. But once you learn different techniques for different types of humor, you can change it up. And being able to change it up is important as a speaker. It's not necessarily important as a regular human being just trying to live your life, but if you want to entertain people, you want to be able to give them some variety in what you offer so that you can surprise them. You can give them a change of pace uh, deliberately in your presentation. And that way they're going to laugh more and they're not going to be just expecting exactly what you're giving them.
That makes sense. I think in with this idea of giving some permission to laugh is that idea of changing it up because I think when people expect, the same thing all the time, it lessens how funny it is because there's a certain element of anticipation and surprise that goes in with humor. And I think that's where some people can go astray is they're just doing this one style all the time, or they're always telling the one style of joke. They're always doing dad jokes, whatever it may be. And then they expect it. So it's not as funny because you already know it's coming.
Well, when you're already a dad, every joke's a dad joke. You have that chance.
This is true. This is true.
When
I
you,
do love a good dad joke. I'm not gonna lie.
when you talk about permission to laugh, though, it's crucial that people understand the concept
Hmm.
because you as a speaker, you may be afraid to use humor, but they as an audience, they may be afraid to laugh at the
Right.
humor you use. That's why you have to indicate from the very beginning that you intend to be humorous, that you
Mm,
are going to have humor throughout your speech, and it's okay for them to laugh. You're encouraging them to laugh, And one of the ways I do that is I try to write an introduction that creates a laugh before I
Oh.
ever start speaking. I work with that introducer if I can to get them to deliver it so that that introducer gets a laugh and the crowd is instantly open and ready for me to get up there and not just have a technical speech that is going to bore them out of their minds. And audiences are desperate for that. I don't
Yeah.
care how much credibility you think you're going to lose not being humorous. You're not going to lose credibility by using humor. But if you don't use humor, you're going to lose your audience altogether.
Right. It might not be the credibility piece, but they just might stop listening. And if they stop listening, then it kind of defeats the whole point. I'm just saying. What about in tough situations? So I know in the new book, I think there's a eulogy
Yes,
that
Katie
has
Munoz
humor in it.
put in
There's how
her
many?
eulogy. Katie Munoz put in her eulogy for her mother.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
talk
helpful
about that.
because there's actually a link in the book. I mean, if you get the paperback version, you can't like hit the link; you have to type it in. But there is a link, so you can go see her giving the speech uh, that when she was practicing it, and she used humor throughout it, and she gets away with it in part because it's her mother.
Right.
The
Okay.
stories are hers, the relationship is hers. She has permission to use humor, but you also have permission to laugh because she's using that humor. And I talk about in the analysis of that speech in the book all the different ways that she was allowed to use
Mm,
humor,
yes.
or how other people, even total strangers who just have been asked perhaps to speak at the funeral, could use humor effectively even in that situation.
Yeah. What do you think what do you think it takes to kind of overcome and be humorous in a difficult situation or find humor in a difficult situation? That I think is one of the biggest challenges. How do you identify the humor and how can you utilize that in a way that's actually funny and not just,
Yeah, you have to be
you know,
cautious, Amanda, or
yeah.
Amanda May. I should always call you Amanda
Okay.
May, right?
Either works.
Speaking of dangerous situations.
Hardly. Everybody calls me both. It's all right.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, you again, it starts with knowing your audience. You've got to know how do they feel about the situation? How do they feel about you? How can you make them feel about you so that you have permission to create humor within a bad situation? But a lot of times, if you're giving a speech and you're talking about a really dark, tense subject, what happens is you build this. eh, I've always heard it described as a balloon of tension, right?
Okay.
And the bigger the balloon gets, eventually it's going to pop. And if you don't control that pop, it's going to pop in different places for different people and they'll tune out. But if you take a pin of humor and pop it for everybody at the same time in the same way and
Mm,
get them to laugh, then they can stay with you because they don't want to stay in that moment of tension. They
right.
need relief, whether it's a death in the family, a death in the company, some tragic situation. And the thing is, unfortunately, we're so wired to laugh that we will oftentimes make light of situations when we're not supposed to.
Mm.
I remember, and this is going to date me, but
That's okay.
back when the Challenger exploded in 1985, 86, I was a
Okay.
senior in high school. And within minutes after that happened, kids were making jokes in the hallway about it, which bothered me to no end. And
Oh, yeah.
I had my car that day and I I just left school and I went home. But in hindsight, it was how they were dealing with it. It was
Mhm.
so traumatic that they had to create humor. And so it's our responsibility as speakers to create humor, but to find a way to create appropriate humor and humor that isn't necessarily um, directed.
Oh, no, I think we lost him for a second there. I'm sure he will come right back. But I wanna kinda touch on this idea of humor can be how you deal with things. Sometimes when things are really difficult, the humor is a way to, again, pop that bubble and release that tension so that you can release the tension and feel better. But it is important to understand that not everyone is going to appreciate that humor. So, time and place can be a huge part of it. Just like knowing your audience, knowing who's with you, you need to understand that some people might not take it well. And sometimes when you're making jokes, I know I do this. I do this a lot. I just like make jokes 24/7 and then I'm like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that." Because I'm just trying to make light of everything constantly. It's my nature. But you have to understand that other people might not respond well and then be open to the idea that they might not respond well. Rich, welcome back.
Yeah,
You
I
popped off for a
don't
second
know
there.
what happened.
Well,
That
the
never
internet,
happens,
that's what happened.
but that's life. So what I was saying, and I know you no doubt tried to finish it for me a little bit, but you have to. Oh, that's why we're friends. There we
Yeah,
go.
because
Um,
humor.
when you're giving a speech, you don't just go in and use humor that you haven't vetted in some way, that you haven't examined, maybe, practice the speech with other people, with family, with friends. Um, just know what you're getting into and be sensitive. I mean, if in doubt, and Jim Key says this all the time, the 2002 world champion of public speaking, 2003. When in doubt, leave it out.
Mhm.
Bottom line.
Yep, that's a good one. That's a very good one. Because if you're worried about something, then that's probably the red flag that you need. I was talking about how outside of speaking even, like, sometimes you need to release tension for humor with humor, not for humor, with humor because that's the only way to, emotionally be able to soften that blow. So
Right.
outside of speaking even, when you are in a tough situation, seeing the lighter side of something can make a big difference, and finding that humor in it. Outside of speaking or presenting to a specific audience, what do you think people can do to see the lighter side when something difficult is happening? And not necessarily, make a joke because of it, but just lighten the load. Is there a way to
Well,
do that?
I think a lot of us naturally find the light side of things, but for those that don't, it's tough for them to even have that kind of point of view. I mean, there's a degree of humor that some people just are never going to get. They're never going to understand, and you have to know who those people are and understand how you can work with them. But when you're in front of an audience, you have to assume that the majority of them are regular, normal people, not people who are spending their life in a very, very dark place.
Mhm.
Because if you address them as if they are all in a very, very dark place, you end up giving a very, very dark speech. And the fact of the matter is, those people are not the vast majority. They are the outliers. And you can say that for just about any speaking audience for any degree. People who might be offended at this joke versus that joke might be offended that I wore a sweater today instead of a tie, or people that if I had worn a tie would have thought that I shouldn't have worn that outrageous a tie. There are
Right.
always
Right.
outliers. And when you talk about the seeing the light, I just thought of Life of Brian. Have you ever seen of Life of Brian?
I don't think I have.
It's a Monty Python movie.
Oh.
Brian
Fantastic.
Brian thought he was Jesus, that
Oh,
Jesus shouldn't have been Jesus, that he should have been Jesus. And at
makes
the end
sense.
of the movie, he's getting crucified, and he's singing with the other people he's being crucified with about you got to look on the bright side of life. It's a very,
Nice.
very famous scene that is, I don't know, the movie came out probably when your parents were like 20s.
I mean, they appreciate you saying that. That's for sure. But yeah, I think finding that lighter moment in the darker times, it can really be just relieving, even. And I think that's one thing. How do you take a story, an instance, something that happens to you, and turn it into a funny story? And is there something about the fact that it really needs to be your story, your experience? I had a in
Doesn't
like
have,
in the so for example, in the book, right, I talk about a time when, I was on my way to a wedding, and I dropped my dog off at the dog sitter, and another dog scratched my entire neck. Like, just I mean, that is not a good situation, right? So how do you take something negative and turn it into something humorous and see that light?
well, in your case, it is personal, so that does help. When you're making light of it, then it becomes funny.
Right. That's a
There's
good point.
an old formula that tragedy plus time equals humor. So the further away from an event, the easier it is to find the humor and the more willing people will be to laugh at it. People still aren't going to laugh at the Challenger explosion. They're
Right.
never going to laugh at 9/11,
No.
but there are other situations that have happened in life that we thought at one time were extremely bad that we can make jokes about, and we do,
Right.
and it just sometimes they're even inappropriate, and yet people laugh anyway. Part of being humorous is being borderline inappropriate, as long as you understand what that borderline is. But I'm glad you mentioned your specific story because I can give general advice all I want. The point of the Go Ahead and Laugh books that I've done were to provide actual examples, actual speeches, because you don't see that in general. You don't see a book where
Right.
you go out and see the speeches and then see them analyzed for what's in them. I mean, there's some political speeches that are analyzed for their political impact, but overall, people don't publish speeches and then have them torn apart by someone.
That's not normal.
Not normal, but that's what you get in this book. And with your situation with the dog, okay, so you make fun of it, but what if the dog had scratched your husband or your boyfriend at the time or whatever the situation would have been? You still could have made fun of that because you're you're still in a relationship with the person who got hurt, and
Mm,
it was a long time ago, and he's okay.
right.
Whoever it is, okay. Now, if the dog had mauled an old lady and she
Right.
ended up in the hospital for a couple of months, yeah, that's not really going to work out.
That's not funny. Right. That
But
makes sense.
there's this term called Schadenfreude where we laugh when people get hurt. I'm sure you don't remember it firsthand, but maybe 12th hand, you remember Mary, Larry, Moe, and Curly, the three
Yeah.
Stooges.
Who
That's all
doesn't
about
know that?
pain,
Right.
getting knocked over with boards and getting your eyes poked in. We laugh when people get hurt when we know it's not that big a deal. We
Mm,
laugh when Dick Van Dyke trips over the couch when he walks in at the beginning of his show. We laugh at Melissa McCarthy when she gets hit by a car in one of her movies and flies 50 feet the other way because we know she's fine.
mhm.
And so, even though if there's a real pain, as long as we know it's fine, and long as we know that you're okay with it, or the people involved are okay with it, we can laugh at it. It
Mm.
wasn't us.
That's an interesting point. So if if it's something seriously tragic and they're not okay, it's not gonna be funny. But if it's something that you end up being okay, you can get better from, it's not that big of a deal, that's when you can find the humor in it. So, like, I just had my wisdom teeth out Friday.
Ow.
Yeah, yeah, not that bad. Raising teenagers is more difficult than that, I will tell you that. But I can find humor in that because I'm clearly all right.
You have
There's gotta be
teenagers?
something there. So
You
that
actually have
situation.
teenagers?
Pardon?
You actually have teenagers?
I have 2 stepsons that are teenagers and
Oh,
a stepdaughter who is preteen. She's 12. So,
gotcha.
yeah. Yeah, and it is more difficult. Someday they'll hear this and be like, "Really?" But I don't think they listen.
Hey, I've
They
got
don't
6
listen
kids.
normally. I can't imagine they listen to the podcast.
I dealt with 6 kids in teenagerdom. 2 of them still are. So,
I forgot you had 6 children. That's a lot.
yeah. Well, I kept having kids because I kept running out of speech ideas.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah. It's like, okay, honey, time for another one.
Plenty of material there, that's for sure. You must have a very full house at Christmas. That's what I
I hope
know.
we do. Yes. Let's hope they come home.
So that's true, that's true. That is a point, that happens eventually, doesn't it? Oh, back to humor. Uh, first of all, thank you for coming on and talking about humor because I think it is an important subject that can help build your confidence and can help you in, maybe more tense situations, just relieve yourself from it. Is there anything physically that you would advise people to do? Is there any tips, tricks, or, some physicality to try to be more relaxed to make jokes and attempt humor?
Well, you need to be relaxed just to get up and speak. But being relaxed looks different for different people.
Yeah.
You know, I look very tense on stage just because of the way I walk. I'm just trying to stay upright half the time and not fall off the stage or accidentally trip on some crack on the actual stage in a hotel or something.
Right. Yeah.
So I can be relaxed but not look relaxed.
Mm.
The key is I'm able to use humor anyway. I'm able to give the speech from a place of confidence anyway because I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm talking about. I'm prepared. And I know that what I'm giving to the audience is more important than how I necessarily look or how they perceive me at the beginning because I
Mm.
can overcome that perception. If you're somebody who's just uptight in general, it doesn't mean you can't be humorous. Uh,
Actually, that could be better
yeah, I mean,
because
there
it will
there
be
are
so
people.
unexpected, right? Like, people will be like, "That was funny." They might not laugh out loud as much because they're not ready for it, but that could hit really well because of it.
Well, there's a comedian by the name of Stephen Wright,
Mhm.
and he just does deadpan humor delivery, and he just looks tense as all get out on stage. He doesn't move his arms, he doesn't walk around much. He just looks at you in a depressed tone of voice and says things like, "I remember when I got home and I accidentally used my car keys to try to get into the house. It started right up.
Ba-dum-tsh.
The police pulled
Ah,
me over and said, 'Where do you live?' I said, 'Right here.'" I love
yeah,
Steve Wright.
yeah,
He's an uptight guy,
yeah.
but he uses that. He knows himself and he uses that to create humor. So know yourself as much as you know your audience. Know yourself more.
That's kinda like Larry David, right? Like, he's very uptight and has a problem with everything, but he's turned that into an empire between Curb Your Enthusiasm and Seinfeld. I mean,
Yep, exactly.
just he is the epitome of I think he's probably the guy that really brought everyday life humor to the masses as much him and Seinfeld, of course. They really embraced this, like, we're just human. These simple situations have humor in them, and welcome to the real world. And I
That's
loved
right.
that about them. They're so much fun. We're getting up to the top of our 30 minutes, but I did want to touch briefly on your catchphrase? Known for? How would I'm not sure the right phrase to describe your idea of win anyway, because
Well, it's
that's
my
really
brain.
your big deal. What'd you call it?
Excuse me, it's my brand.
That's it, the
It-
brand. Yes.
Your yes,
You're
you may. I'm the win anyway guy.
I wanted to have you just speak on that a little bit so that the people know about a little bit more in depth about who Rich is and the win anyway concept, because I think that is huge in confidence, in giving yourself permission, in the whole thing about this podcast, right? Like all of the concepts. Tell me a little bit more about the win anyway
Sure.
brand.
Well, humor factors into win anyway too, because winning anyway is all about being able to define your own victory.
Mm,
We live in a world that likes to tell us whether we're winning or losing.
I like
And
that.
sometimes we get approval through laughter, and sometimes we get disapproval when we think we're being funny and we don't get laughter. Well, you got to be able to move past it. You got to be able to deal with it. And things like that happen in life. You never know what's going to happen to you in life and what the world is going to say about you about that. I have a lot of different examples that I use when I talk about winning anyway. One of the biggest ones is my leg. I grew up with a left leg that was always smaller than my right.
Hmm.
I limped my entire life. I still limp. I I was told that if I didn't, kind of just stay behind the desk my whole life, I was going to end up in a wheelchair. I
Wow.
kind of scoffed at that, and I went out and played basketball and did a whole bunch of stuff I probably shouldn't have been doing. And in my 30s, I ended up not being able to walk anymore.
Oh.
And I had to make a decision that I never thought I'd have to make, which was letting go of my leg, basically upgrading it.
That's a good way of putting it.
So, and that's what I had to do because, people would say, "Oh, it's so sad that you're going to lose your leg." Like, I'm not losing my leg. I know exactly where it's going. I'm upgrading my leg. Now I have a super deluxe robot leg. And when I talk about it in front of an audience, I always follow it up with the fact that I should have done it years earlier because I
Mm,
spent so long not being able to walk for a large portion of the day because of the pain in my ankle, time lost with my kids.
yeah.
And at the end of the day, giving up something, doing something that the world would say is losing, was a victory for me. And there's nothing like that new foot smell.
Well, and not too many people get to experience that new foot smell. So
That's
you're
right.
you're
But you
you're a very
can.
small portion of the world that has that specific experience that is lucky to have it, right? I
Right.
love
But
that concept
everybody
though.
has their win anyway moments where
Absolutely.
they may need to cut a relationship out of their life. They may have to lose a relationship, lose a job, lose a habit, lose whatever it is, or even if they're just going after a goal and they're not getting there, understanding that even though they haven't achieved the big goal, they're still getting somewhere. They have an opportunity to learn something from it and decide how they're going to go after it some more or how they may change their goal. And
Mm,
that way, again, you define for yourself what that victory is. And when you look at life in that way, you never have to identify as a loser. You
I
can
love
always
that.
identify with victory, and you don't have to beat somebody else to do it.
Brilliant. I think that's such a great mindset that every single person can think about. Like maybe you're losing, but are you really upgrading? And that's an incredible way to go about life in general. It's just looking for the upgrade rather than the loss and seeing the opportunity and everything. That's kind of like I always talk like, your path isn't a straight line. You're going to go all over the place to get to where you want to go. And that's part of the journey that's so great, that's gonna prepare you for where you are at. It's upgrading, okay? You lost one thing, but how did that lead you to something better? And if you take the time to reflect on it and actually look at the situation rather than just sorrow in it, then you're gonna win anyway.
Exactly.
Did I do that right?
That perfectly.
Yes. Well, I love that concept, and I wanna thank you for coming here. If people wanna know more about you, about the Win Anyway, you have some keynotes for that too. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely. You can go to my website, richhopkins.com. I try to make it really, really easy.
It's good. Easy
You
is
can
good.
find me on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, all under my own name, because I was an early adopter way back in the early 2000s,
It's the right way to do it.
way back when. But hey, they should get the book for you, Amanda May, because you're in the book.
I am.
You're
I'm in the
great.
book. I'm in a book, you guys. Oh my gosh. That's crazy in and of itself.
So go to Amazon. It's available now.
I have the link in the notes. If I don't, I will. Tell you that right now. And you can check it out. What's the name of the book, Rich?
Go ahead and laugh. Volume 2.
Volume 2, which means there was volume 1, which means, hey, we must be doing something right.
That's right.
I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you putting me in a book. That's like, I'm telling you guys, this is so weird that I'm in a book. I have no idea what my life is about to unfold to. More's coming. I actually think I have another book in the works too that I didn't know I was going to be involved in either. So there it is. I didn't know I was that cool. Now I know I'm a little bit cooler. But thank you for coming. Thank you all for watching and listening and commenting. I love it when people comment while we are doing the podcast live. It really enhances and it lets me know what you like, what you want to know more about. If you ever want to ask a question while we are live, feel free to do so for one of our interviews or me or whoever, whoever happens to be here. But Rich, thank you for coming. Thank you for showing up, putting out an amazing book and being just a cool dude. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I hope you get lots of viewership other than my boss.
Hey, I take anyone. Anyone is good for me. If this was helpful for you,
really, it was pre-recorded.
Nah. Well, what's the fun in pre-recording when you can go live? I think it's so much more fun. It's so much more interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, if this was helpful for you, please feel free to share it out. Give us your comments, your likes, anything you can think of. And as always, be beautiful. And remember, you are the only person that needs to give you permission to do anything in your life. Because yes, you may. Bye, everyone.
If you are 70 years old and you want to take up tap dancing, this is your time.